So January is usually a pretty strong reading month for me, and 2024 was no different. I read 12 books in January and most of them were either 4 or 5 stars. I think I had one book that was a 3 stars, but nothing below a 3, which is obviously fantastic. So there's lots of books that I'm excited to talk about in this wrap up. But however, I'm actually going to start this video by going through how many books I read from my TBR versus how many books I added to my TBR. One of my goals this year is to hold myself accountable and actually read the books that I own that are just sitting on my shelves unread. So of the 12 books that I read in January, 4 of them were books that I actually owned. The rest I got through Scribd, which is now called Everend, or they were Kindle Unlimited books. And then I added 2 books to my TBR. Talon Sister by Jen Williams was a late Christmas or birthday present from my sister, and then Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I actually ordered this last year, but it didn't arrive until January, so I wasn't sure whether to count it, but I'm going to count it because obviously it wasn't on my TBR up until this month. So yeah, I read 4 books and then added 2 books, which gives a net minus 2 books. I'm happy with that. I think it could be worse, but it also could have been a lot better, so hopefully I can build on that throughout the rest of this year. My goal this year with my wrap-ups is to try and incorporate different elements and make sure that I'm staying on track with my reading goals. So the next reading goal that I wanted to check in on was my series update. So again, one of my goals this year is to read series and make progress in series, and there were 3 books in January that I read that are part of series. First up, I started and also finished The Nightborn duet by Carissa Broadbent, which is the first duology within the Crowns of Nyaxia. I am counting this as a completed series because that storyline wraps up, but then there's also going to be more books within this series. Calling it now, I reckon Serpent and the Wings of Night is going to be my favourite book of the year, if not one of my favourites. It's going to make the top 10 list. I also really enjoyed the novella 6 Crimson Roses, is that what it was called? 6 Cursed Roses, and then Ashes and the Star-Crossed King is the second book that completes this arc of the story. For anyone who doesn't know, this series follows a young woman called Araya, who is human, but she was raised by the Vampire King, and in the first book she's competing in a series of trials because the winner is granted 1 wish by the goddess of death, and these trials are brutal. I don't think I was expecting how brutal it was going to be. There's also a really slow burn romance, which I really appreciated, and I love fantasy romance where it's kind of 60% fantasy and then 40% romance. That's like my perfect split, and I feel like this book delivered on that. The second book then becomes much more political, and it deals with the conflict between the various vampire houses, and I just thought this was really addictive. I really want to read more books by Carissa Broadbent. I know that she has another series which I want to check out because I think that's on KU as well. The next book that I read that's part of a series is The Devotion of Suspect X by Keigo Higashino. This is part of the Detective Galileo series, I think is what it's called. This is a crime novel. I think you could call it a mystery thriller as well, but it's basically following this detective who's investigating a crime. So a crime is committed at the start of the book, and you as the reader know what happened, but you're watching this detective try and piece everything together. So it's a really unique narrative style. I found this just so unique in general. It's not fast paced, but also it was so compulsively readable because you know what happened, but you don't know everything. You would think that that would take away some of the tension, but it really didn't, because there were still lots of twists twists and turns, and the ending really surprised me. But it was one of those situations where I got to the end and I thought, this is so clever. I can see why this is a bestseller, and I think it's been adapted into like various movies. I don't know whether I'm going to pick up other books within this series because I haven't heard anything about them. But if you have read this series, please let me know if it is worth reading the other books, because I really enjoyed this. The final book within a series that I read in January was The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. I am so glad that I finally read this book because it's been on my TBR for years. I think I actually put this on a list of series that I wanted to start in 2022 or 2021. Obviously I didn't get around to it at that time, but I finally picked it up in January and I liked this. I gave it 4 stars. Most of the issues that I had were to do with personal preference type things rather than anything that I thought was objectively wrong about this book. So The Lies of Locke Lamora is often compared to Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo because they're both heist stories. Outside of that though, I feel like the pacing throughout both is very different and the focus is very different because Six of Crows is quite plot driven, but The Lies of Locke Lamora is more character driven. The first half is very slow and it focuses on establishing these character relationships and showing you the dynamic within this group of thieves. The main thing I struggled with was the world building. So every so often there would be these interludes, and some of the interludes were really interesting because you got to see our main character Locke Lamora as a kid and you could follow how he grew into the character and the man he is in the present day. So that I was fine with, but there were also long descriptions, like really detailed descriptions that I really struggled to process. It was almost like my brain just refused to build a picture of this world, and yeah, that was something that I think let it down a little bit for me. I struggled anyway with pages and pages of exposition and I was a little bit bored at times throughout the story. But yeah, once I got to the end, I really appreciated the groundwork that Scott Lynch laid in the first half for me to be able to enjoy the second half. Gave this one 4 stars. I can't remember if I mentioned that, but I would really recommend this if you like character-driven fantasy and you like complex characters, and especially if you like friendships within fantasy. I thought that the relationship between Locke and Jean was done really well. So in this final section, I do have a few standalones that I wanted to review. I did read some of these in a read and vlog that went live in January, so I'll leave that linked in the description just in case you want my fresh thoughts on any of those books, because I did talk about them in a bit more detail, but I'll quickly run through those now. The List by Yomi Adegoke I gave 5 stars, one of my favourite audiobooks that I've listened to in a while, and I went into it with lower expectations because it has, I think, a 3.14 average rating on Goodreads, which is quite low, but I thought this was really thought-provoking and I thought the audiobook narrators really enhanced the listening experience because these characters felt like real people. They weren't particularly likeable and they didn't act how I necessarily would have reacted in the situation that they find themselves in. But yeah, I don't need to like characters to appreciate a story, and I thought that the author's intent with this book was to be provocative and to spark a conversation, and I feel like it achieved that. I think this would be a really good book to read as part of a book club or to buddy read. I think that there's a lot that you could discuss and pick apart, and I have seen some strong opinions on this book on Goodreads and I can understand why. What Never Happened by Rachel Howzell Hall is a thriller that I gave 3 stars. This was okay. It was kind of slow and meandering in the beginning and I couldn't really understand what direction it was going in, but yeah, I liked the atmosphere and how it took place on this isolated tropical island. The ending just didn't really land for me, so I was a little disappointed, but I would read more books by this author. The Charm Offensive by Alison Cochrun I gave 4 stars. stars. This is a romance between two guys who are involved in a reality TV show that's very similar to The Bachelor. So one of the guys is a producer on the show, and then the other guy is the star of the show. Really enjoyed the characters in this. I thought they were really cute together, and it made me feel a little bit emotional towards the end. I was almost going to give it 5 stars, but I would have liked more groundwork to the relationship in the beginning because I struggled to see how things would work between them in the long term. Some aspects felt a little bit rushed to me. The first book that I actually read in January was Passing by Nella Larson. This is a classic. I think it came out in the 1920s or around that time, and I became interested in it because I heard it was one of the inspirations behind The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, which I read in 2020 or 2021, and it was one of my favourite books the year that I read it. Passing follows our main character Irene, who is a black woman living in New York, and she's out for lunch one afternoon when she runs into Claire, who's a girl, well, a woman now, that she knew when she was growing up. Claire, however, is now passing as white, and she has a very racist husband, and she's feeling very isolated and lonely, and this book is about how Claire gradually infiltrates Irene's life. It has this sinister undertone. I don't think I was quite expecting that tone, but it really worked. Like, the audiobook, I think I read in like 2 sittings because it's only like 2 hours long. I got it for free, I think, through Prime Reading. I was just browsing through Audible looking for something quick to read, and that's when I came across it. But yeah, really enjoyed this one. I would like to read a physical copy, I think, at some point. Because of the more classical language, I think there were certain things that I missed out on by listening to the audiobook. But the ending, I think that ending is going to stick with me because that was not what I was expecting the direction of this book to go in. Next on my list is The Quarry Girls by Jess Lourey, which is marketed as a thriller. I would describe it as a coming-of-age story that has a mystery and also some thrilling elements. Our main character is, I think, 16 or 17, and it's set in this small town in the 1970s where teenage girls are going missing. That's kind of all you really need to know about the plot. The main character witnesses something that she believes is related to these girls that are going missing. I'm trying to be vague because I don't want to spoil anything, but the main character is also at that age where she's seeing her friends grow up and act like adults, but she doesn't quite feel ready for that yet. So I thought that was interesting. My favourite thing about this was the atmosphere. It did feel like the 70s, and I really liked that, but I don't think it's going to stick with me long term. So I gave it 4 stars, but it's probably closer to a 3.5. The final book that I read in January has a word in the title that I always struggle to say, but it's Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. I think I might have got it right that time, but the cover will be on the screen so you can see. This is by Sutanto, who's an author that I've never read from before, but I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. I think part of that was down to the audiobook because I thought the narrator was fantastic, but I also read this, I think, at the perfect time. I really needed something this comforting and wholesome. There's a few different characters that you follow, but the main character is Vera Wong, who is a 60-year-old Chinese woman living in San Francisco, and she owns a tea shop. One morning, she goes to open her tea shop for the day when she finds a dead body in the middle of the tea shop, and the police don't really take it too seriously. They think that it was accidental. They don't think it was murder, but Vera Wong believes that it was murder, so she starts to investigate. So there is that mystery, but it's not really a mystery. It's more a book about found family. Vera is basically working through her list of suspects, and you also get their perspectives, and I just loved the characters in this. I thought that it was really wholesome. This does have a character who was previously in an abusive relationship, so I just wanted to mention that as a general content warning. But I need to read more books by this author because I really loved this. That does bring me to the end of this video though, so thanks for watching. If you made it this far, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. Let me know as well if you enjoyed this style of wrap up. I don't know how it's gonna come together. I really enjoyed filming it this way, but I'm not sure what I'm gonna think of the final video once I finished editing it. So yeah, if you have any feedback, then let me know that as well. But otherwise, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me. But otherwise, I will see you next time. I'm losing my voice, I'm so sorry. Bye.